evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. The downfall of Hollywood producer Harvey Weinstein essentially complete tonight. The allegations are far too numerous to ignore. He's been fired from his own company. Now he's apparently in some kind of rehab facility talking about himself while the NYPD investigates criminal charges against him. Whatever happens next, you pretty much know what Harvey Weinstein's Wikipedia entry is going to say 20 years from now. But the larger Weinstein saga is just beginning. Many powerful people knew what Harvey Weinstein was doing and not only ignored his crimes, but actively took his side against his many victims. It's a long list, but at the very top of that list is NBC News. NBC had this story months ago. Their former anchor Ronan Farrow conclusively exposed more than a dozen allegations against Weinstein by women who say he sexually harassed, groped, even raped them. But the network killed that investigation. Now, NBC News president Noah Oppenheim says the company had good reason for doing that. But did the company have good reason? Trace Gallagher has taken a very close look at this question, and he joins us tonight with an answer. Trace?
Tucker, NBC News has gone on the record saying the reason it decided not to run the Ronan Farrow story on Harvey Weinstein is because he didn't have enough reporting to go on the air. Well, now a number of outlets, including the Daily Beast and Huffington Post, are refuting that, saying that Farrow began reporting on the Harvey Weinstein story back in January. And by July, he had interviewed at least 8 Weinstein accusers and had also secured the coveted New York police audio tape of Weinstein admitting he groped a 22-year-old Italian model. Listen.
Yesterday you touched my breast.
Oh, please, I'm sorry. Just come on. I'm used to that. Come on.
Are you used to that?
Yes, come in.
Then in August, a woman who accused Weinstein of raping her agreed to an on-camera interview as long as she was in silhouette and not identified. The Huffington Post says not only did NBC News refuse to provide a camera crew for the interview, it tried to stop the interview altogether and tried to stop Farrow from reporting on the story altogether. So Farrow paid for the camera crew himself. NBC says the opposite, quoting, "Ronan very understandably wanted to keep forging ahead, so we didn't want to stand in his way, and he took it to the New Yorker and did a ton more extraordinary work." But a dozen people inside and outside NBC reportedly claim NBC slow-walked the story and ran it up the corporate chain. Not just news president Andy Lack, but all the way up to NBC Universal CEO Steve Burke, something news employees called unprecedented. In fact, some told the HuffPost that Weinstein's attorneys trying to kill the story and NBC News appeared to be synonymous. And it should be noted that last week, when the New York Times first broke the story, both CBS and ABC ran it during their evening newscasts. NBC did not, saying Weinstein was not a nationally recognized figure. The same excuse was used for pulling a Weinstein skit from Saturday Night Live. Tucker.
Thanks, Trace. So let's be clear. NBC is lying. Yesterday, News Division head Noah Oppenheim claimed NBC, quote, encouraged Farrow to report that story. The opposite is true. They pressured him to drop it. Oppenheim says, quote, NBC gave him resources to report that story over many, many months. Maybe, except for a camera crew when Farrow tried to interview an alleged rape victim. Oppenheim says Farrow's stories, quote, was not the story that we were looking at when we made our judgment. Yet another lie. As Farrow told Rachel Maddow 2 nights ago, he'd finished the bulk of his reporting on Weinstein when he went to the New Yorker. That's why the magazine accepted his piece in the first place.
Why did you end up reporting this story for the New Yorker and not for NBC News?
Look, you would have to ask NBC and NBC executives about the details of that story. I'm not going to comment on any news organization's story that they, did or didn't run.
NBC says that, you didn't, that the story wasn't publishable, that it wasn't ready to go by the time that you brought it to them. But obviously it's ready to go by the time you got it into the New Yorker.
I walked into the door at the New Yorker with an explosively reportable piece that should have been public earlier. And immediately, obviously, the New Yorker recognized that, and it is not accurate to say that it was not reportable. In fact, there were multiple determinations that it was reportable at NBC.
We'd bet money that her employer didn't want Rachel Maddow to do that segment, but she did it anyway. Good for her. So why did a purported news organization kill a blockbuster news story? Well, presumably we will find out at some point. This is a scandal, and the truth has a way of emerging from those in the end. One possible explanation is Noah Oppenheim. In addition to being the head of NBC News, Oppenheim is a Hollywood screenwriter with deep ties to the movie business and to the Democratic Party establishment. Could it be that Oppenheim had a business relationship with Harvey Weinstein or Weinstein's company? It's not a far-fetched possibility at all. And yet, as of earlier today, Oppenheim and NBC, when asked directly, refused to say. Noah Oppenheim ought to resign immediately, and if he doesn't, he ought to be fired immediately by NBC's parent company, Comcast. News executives are not allowed to tell lies. They're not allowed to participate in cover-ups. They ought to answer straightforward questions straightforwardly. When they don't, you know they're corrupt, and that's exactly what NBC News is. For more on the broader media efforts to protect Harvey Weinstein in the middle of all this, we're joined by Joe Concha, who covers that industry for The Hill newspaper. Joe, thanks for coming on tonight.
Sure.
So the red flag for me, and these are very complicated stories and we don't know all the answers, but we do know that NBC News, Noah Oppenheim, and Noah Oppenheim's agent are refusing to answer a very simple question, which is, did Noah Oppenheim, as president of NBC News, have any business relationship at all with Harvey Weinstein or his company? And they won't answer that question. What is the possible range of explanations for refusing to answer a simple question like that?
That's what bothers me about this, Tucker, that the head of a news organization is refusing to answer questions. He should go to, not to NBC News, obviously, don't keep it in-house, but find some other publication, somebody you don't compete with, sit down and answer questions. It's exactly what he would ask the journalists of NBC News to do. And you could break this down 100 different ways. Two things that really stick out at me, and Trace brought it up in his piece. 7.5 hours after this story broke on Thursday, the NBC Nightly News, which is watched by 8 million people, did not cover it. So that's the news side. The entertainment side of NBC, you have Seth Meyers and Jimmy Fallon didn't do any jokes on Harvey Weinstein for 5 nights. Then you have Saturday Night Live, as Trace mentioned. There were jokes on Weinstein, and then suddenly they didn't appear on air. So you either believe that those 4 entities decided that it wasn't a story or an order, the code red, so to speak, came down from somewhere and said, we're not going to touch this until they absolutely had to because it was blown wide open. That's point number 1. 2, we talked about this many months ago, the Access Hollywood tape. NBC property, Access Hollywood.
Right.
And it just happened that this tape walked out the door that they knew about for months, maybe longer, by the way, the contents of it, and ended up in a Washington Post reporter's mailbox 2 nights before the second presidential debate. By all intents and purposes, that should have ended the election, except the candidate was Trump, and he was foolproof of this sort of stuff, and obviously he won. So you look at those 2 simple explanations, right, or those 2 scenarios. Then compare it, Tucker, to what we saw this week from NBC News, and particularly yesterday, where they had a bombshell report, an exclusive, that said the president wanted to include or increase, our nuclear arsenal tenfold. And they have that in quotes, right? And then President Trump disputes that, but more importantly, Secretary Mattis, who's one of the most credible people in Washington, or at least respected, says it's absolutely false. What was that story based on? Unnamed sources. We don't know where those sources came from. It could very easily be somebody's father's, brother's, nephew's, cousin's, former roommate. We don't know. That was good enough to get the air. But Ronan Farrow, who had tapes, who had videotapes with actual accusers, that's not good enough for us. We don't want to get in your way. We don't want to get in your way. Go take it to the New Yorker. So unpack all of that and then ask yourself, who do you believe?
It's remarkable. I don't think in my life I've ever taken the side of a politician over a news organization, and it pains me to do it, but I don't think they're legitimate. I think they're corrupt. I think they're liars. I think they're debasing their own currency. But they're not the only media organization to be sucked into this. And again, there's a lot we don't know, and I don't want to cast aspersions when not warranted. But Amazon, Jeff Bezos, seems to have been sucked into this story by Rose McGowan. Do you understand what the allegation is?
Yeah, I read that on the way over here in the Daily Mail, and basically you have a whole bunch of tweets from Rose McGowan, who was a big actress in the 90s, accusing Bezos, the Amazon owner, and also, by the way, the owner of the Washington Post, of killing a series that she wanted to get on the air, and said also that she was raped as well. To be honest with you, I read it on the way over here. I don't quite have all the details. You read a couple of tweets, and it's hard to kind of pieced together. But now what you're seeing here, Tucker, is this story has definitive legs. It's almost now, it is a week old, and it's going to keep going and going because more journalists like the Huffington Post, like the Daily Beast, like even CNN is going to dig into this, and more journalists are going to be exposed for protecting Weinstein. And then even news organizations, it's going to just keep, I think NBC was betting on, well, it's the era of Trump and this thing's going to blow over because the news cycle moves so fast, and it's not going away. People aren't going to let this go, and some people at some very high places, I have a feeling, are going to be exposed in this far more than Harvey Weinstein.
Yeah, I mean, Weinstein's self-evidently a pig. The revealing part was watching the entire ruling class mobilize behind him to defend him, and the indefensible, really interesting moment. Joe, thank you.
Thank you.
For more developments in this story, which is moving quickly, we're joined by Deadline senior editor Dominic Patton. Dominic, thanks a lot for coming on tonight. So,
thank you, Tucker, for having me, as always.
First things first, where is Harvey Weinstein right now? Do we know?
Well, we've heard that Harvey is now going to a rehab center in Arizona, but of course where Harvey really is right now is in a crapload of trouble. He's got the NYPD, he's got Scotland Yard, and possibly, as Deadline reported earlier today, the LAPD looking into possibly opening investigations into criminal charges.
Yeah, I don't think you understand, Dominic. Harvey Weinstein's the victim here. He's got a disease. Okay, that's why he's in rehab, so I hope you're feeling sorry for him. What do you know about the Rose McGowan allegations late today?
Well, here's what's going on with this, and we've just had some breaking news on this, is this, sexual harassment obviously is a big problem in Hollywood, and it's now affecting Amazon as well. They have just put the head of their TV division, Roy Price, on leave for allegations as what has come out of a sexual harassment incident that happened in 2015 with a top producer. That producer went public today. Price is now out, or at least shifted aside temporarily. As for this Rose McGowan situation, let's give full points to Rose. She was one of the first people to talk about the Harvey Weinstein situation when no one listened to her in Hollywood. She's been talking about this situation, and essentially what she's saying is she had a project in development with Amazon when she asked them and told them, first of all, about the incident with Weinstein and asked for Weinstein to not be, and I quote her, bailed out. They effectively, it seems, killed her project. So she's now calling foul.
Have they responded? Has Bezos's office or Amazon or the Washington Post, has there been any kind of response to her allegation?
Not on this matter, Tucker, at least not as far as I can tell, having come on the air with you right now. But again, like the Weinstein case, this is something where every hour we're seeing something more. Let's just go back to one thing very clearly. Yes. Less than a week after the New York Times unveiled this story, less than 2 days after the New Yorker published their story, there are now 32 women, including Ashley Judd, Rose McGowan, Gwyneth Paltrow, and many more, who are saying that they were sexually harassed by Harvey Weinstein. And including in that, 3 of them were revealed in the New Yorker piece, 3 of them are talking about rape, which is why the NYPD and perhaps the LAPD might start looking into this once again.
It's just hard to believe, if true, that something this vast could have continued for this long without a huge number of people knowing a lot about it. It just doesn't make any sense. Dominic, thank you for coming on. That was a great description of what the latest is. Thanks.
Thank you, Tucker.
Well, with all the allegations against Harvey Weinstein, and they are mounting by the hour, what are the legal consequences? Up next, we'll put that question to Judge Jeanine Pirro, a longtime prosecutor specializing in sex crimes. Plus, the police can't get their story straight about what happened in Las Vegas. To put it mildly, the press aren't asking any questions about why not. Up next, we'll talk to a police expert about how this case got so bungled and what might have actually happened that tragic Sunday in Las Vegas. Stay tuned. We've got breaking and unexpected news in the Harvey Weinstein case. We want to bring back Dominic Patton of Deadline for the business implications of this scandal. Dominic, what have you heard?
Well, we just published, Tucker, at the time that you and I were talking previously, my colleague Mike Fleming Jr. published a story with some of our other great reporters saying that the Weinstein Company itself, as Harvey is looking down the barrel of all these potential charges and allegations, the Weinstein Company itself, top Hollywood agencies are now refusing to allow their talent to work with them, and it looks like some financiers might be talking about pulling out money. In fact, the creator of Hamilton has said that he wants his film In the Heights, which the Weinstein Company were involved with, he wants them to walk away from it. That's big news, because now you're seeing not only what's happening with Harvey personally, you're now seeing a company that might be on the brink.
Man,
you can see all of this at Deadline.com.
Dominic, thanks for that update. I appreciate it. There's a life lesson. Apart from the scandal, there is a very real legal element to the Harvey Weinstein saga. According to at least one news source, the FBI is reportedly investigating him right now, as is the New York City Police Department. We're joined now by Judge Jeanine Pirro, who hosts Justice with Judge Jeanine Saturday nights at 9 right here on Fox. Before she was a judge, she was a very well-known prosecutor specializing in sex crimes, so she seemed the perfect person. Judge, where does Harvey Weinstein stand legally right now?
In a lot of trouble, Tucker. Look, I heard the tape that NYPD, the Special Victims Unit, put together. Make no mistake, that tape would have been sufficient in my office when I was the DA to prosecute Harvey Weinstein. And the excuse that the tape was insufficient to prove a crime is simple hogwash. The tape that there was no intent shown, or the argument that there's no intent shown on the tape, is the same argument that Jim Comey used with Hillary. The intent is a secret, silent operation of your mind. And in this particular tape, the intent is shown by Harvey Weinstein's own words. He says, "Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I won't do it again." She specifically says on the tape, "But you touched my breast." And he says, "Oh, I'm sorry. I won't do it again. Just come in and just watch me shower." This is a perfect case. She was wired. She went to the police immediately. They see her on surveillance cameras running out, very upset, acting just like a young woman who had been groped would act. This is a predator. He is a serial predator. He has preyed on vulnerable young women, and he dangles a carrot of fame and fortune and the ability to be in movies, and he's gotten away with it. And there is a question as to whether or not Cyrus Vance, the DA who rejected this tape by NYPD, has taken money from Harvey Weinstein. And I'm not suggesting that they're necessarily connected, but here's the bottom line. Any DA worth his or her salt would have gone forward with a jury, because this isn't just a he said, she said. This is a she said, he said, and then he said exactly what she said on the tape.
We know that Cyrus Vance, the prosecutor you referred to, did take apparently $10,000 from David Boies, who is kind of in-house Democratic Party lawyer, worked for the Clintons and worked for Harvey Weinstein, was representing Weinstein in this matter. Would that be improper for a prosecutor to take money from a lawyer whose case he just dropped? I don't understand how that's allowed.
You know, unless you can show a nexus, Tucker. I mean, there are lawyers. Look, David Boies is a lawyer who represents all kinds of people.
Yeah, he does.
And that would be very hard to show necessarily a nexus between that case and that contribution in Harvey Weinstein. But you don't even need to go that far, Tucker. You've got a case here, and any prosecutor worth his or her salt would have gone forward with that case.
So why didn't he?
To say that the NYPD didn't do their job. This is a stellar job, wiring up a victim who, by all accounts, was impeccable in catching him in this case.
It sure seems like it was not their fault. I mean, I don't know how much tighter they could have made the case. So that gets back to the central question, and you never want to think prosecutors are corrupt, because that's the deepest kind of corruption. But why wouldn't Cy Vance have gone forward with this?
Look, I can't get into Cy Vance's mind. I don't know what he was thinking, but it's just as people say. When you've got a case with a high-profile defendant, the prosecutors very often say to themselves, is this going to be worth it? Is she credible? You know, this guy's going to bring in all the big guns. He's going to bring in all the money, but the truth is on the tape, Tucker. There is nothing to argue here. Turn on the tape, let the jury listen to it, and send them into the deliberation room to deliberate.
You think of all the cases that don't have that go forward. Really quickly, where does Harvey Weinstein stand now? The Daily Mail is reporting the feds are looking into him, NYPD. Do you think he's in legal jeopardy now?
Do I think? I know he's in legal jeopardy right now. This guy is a serial predator. He is a recidivist. Based upon the simple stuff that we've been reading in the media, he has been doing it over and over. He's admitted he's been doing it over and over. And the claim that, gee, I'm sorry, I'm going to get help. Nobody cares, Harvey, if you get help. We are not social service workers. We're in law enforcement. We're DAs. We're in the criminal justice system. It's time for you to fess up, although he already has fessed up in many different ways. It's time for justice, period.
I don't know how going to a $1,000 a night facility to talk about yourself with a therapist is exculpatory in any way, but they keep pointing to it. Judge Janine, former prosecutor Janine Pirro, thanks for joining us tonight. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Tucker.
Harvey Weinstein, not the only sexual predator in Hollywood. There's the understatement of the year. Up next, singer-songwriter Joy Villa will tell us about the harassment she faced during her years in the industry. Interesting segment. Stay tuned for that. Deep trouble tonight, as we've reported, but his personal downfall by itself will do nothing to fix what is apparently a pretty toxic culture in the broader entertainment industry. Joy Villa is a singer and a songwriter, has been for a while. She says sexual harassment and even rape are deeply ingrained in that world, the entertainment world. Joy Villa joins us tonight. Joy, thanks a lot for coming on. So I think
Hi,
anybody
Tucker.
covering the story has gotten what I've gotten all day, all week, is texts from people in LA saying, you know, this is nothing. You've been in that world. How common is this?
That's right.
It's absolutely prominent. That's the problem. The reason it was kept secret for so long is because it's normal. In the entertainment industry, it's very, very common for higher up level execs to prey on brand new artists. And it's sort of looked at as it's just what they do. Boys will be boys, power play, and so forth. So that's the biggest shock of this, is that honestly, people in the entertainment industry are not shocked at this.
So when you went into it, did you know that?
I had heard many stories. I'll tell you, I was a good girl from California. I hadn't heard a lot of stories, enough stories to warn me from it. But when I went in, First, I became disillusioned with the whole Hollywood trap. I said, is this really how it is? Why am I trying to be an artist if all I'm going to get is people trying to, touch me and hurt me and take from me? And I realized I have to stay in this industry to make it. So it became sort of a battle, a day-to-day battle. And I learned very quickly, within a couple months, what this industry is really about.
Well, be specific. What's it like for a young woman entering your business? What are young women likely to encounter?
Well, Tucker, for instance, I was propositioned by a great agency in Burbank, California. It was only my first couple months being in Los Angeles. I sent in bikini pictures. Bikini photos are very common in this industry, just to see what your body looks like, nothing lewd. And I got a message from one of the agents. Yeah. Yep. One of the agents said, we want to see you. The main guy, the CEO of the agency, would like to see you. We love what you look like. So I was ushered into a meeting with the owner, the main guy. I was very, very excited. I was all of probably 19 years old. And he closed the door and he said, we love what you look like. And if you, make me feel good, I can make you rich and famous. You give me something, I'll give you something. What do you say? And I was absolutely disgusted, and I turned around. I was embarrassed. I looked down at the carpet. I said, I'm so sorry. This is not for me. No, thank you. And I backed out of there as fast as I could. But unfortunately, I was probably one of many girls he had propositioned, and it was very straightforward.
So he was that direct about it?
I'll do something for you.
So there was no mistaking his meaning at all?
No, that was the worst thing. It was not something sort of sly. It wasn't even a wink wink. It was, here's the deal. You do this for me and I will make it worth your while. It was straight up prostitution, and that's really how Hollywood is run these days. And I think it has been for a very long time. And we're going to see a lot of these stories come out even more, because the Tower of Hollywood, this Hollywood swamp, is starting to crumble. If Weinstein is getting, pulled to the surface, all these other smaller players are going to start to be pulled to the surface. And
I believe you. I believe you. Of course I do. And I've heard the same thing from others. But the part I don't understand is why nobody said anything. That's so over the top. That why didn't someone? Why is this the first time we're hearing this?
It's, you know, honestly, it's not really the first time you're hearing it, because a lot of people try to say things. It's just, it's so overlooked, and it's so, oh, you know, she's just unhappy because she didn't get cast for the role. She's jealous. He wanted the role, so he's going to make up stories. It's buried by the actual establishment of Hollywood. It's not just one evil guy. It's not just that one perpetrator pig. It's everyone around them who is burying the story and not letting other people speak. Also, they get paid off. You know, what's a cool $100,000 to keep your mouth shut? So what if you gave up your life and your career? A lot of people take those deals and walk away.
You kind of wonder where the feminists have been in all of this. I think it's a fair question. Joy, thanks for joining us and for your account.
Not talking. Thank you so much, Tucker. Appreciate it.
White House Chief of Staff John Kelly made his first public appearance at the White House press briefing today. He used his debut to deny reports there's any discord between himself and the president.
Offer to you that although I read it all the time, pretty consistently, I'm not quitting today. I don't believe, and I just talked to the president, I don't think I'm being fired today. My only frustration, with all due respect to everyone in the room, is when I come to work in the morning and read about things I allegedly said, or things that Mr. Trump allegedly said, or people who were going to be fired or whatever, or think, and it's just not true. That's my frustration. I mean no disrespect to y'all. Is this the iron hand that I brought to the staff?
No, but did you? No. Is that how you see it? You don't see that you have an iron hand?
Just put some organization to it.
Well, can you explain?
With a smile on my face. You guys with the cameras always catch me when I'm thinking hard, and it looks like I'm frustrated and mad. I don't know all the names, so you.
Do his tweets make your job more difficult, General Kelly?
No. No.
Tweets don't make it harder at all, says General Kelly. He's a tough soldier. Well, up next, the Las Vegas story. Police still can't get to the bottom of it, or even close, or even settle the basic facts of what happened. Meanwhile, the media seem focused on the entirely wrong questions. What is going on exactly? Up next, we'll talk to a law enforcement expert about why we still don't know anything. Plus, we'll talk to the head of Mark Zuckerberg's lobbying group, which is trying to defeat the administration's immigration priorities, in addition to controlling all the information in the world. Do they have too much power? Of course they do. We'll talk about it in greater detail coming up. Nearly 2 weeks since the horrifying shootings in Las Vegas, and unbelievably, nobody seems able to answer even the most basic questions about what actually happened. Police initially told us that Stephen Paddock shot a hotel security guard in the hallway outside his room after he'd finished murdering more than 50 people on the plaza below. Then authorities changed that timeline. What actually happened, investigators explained, was that at 9:59 p.m. that night, Paddock shot guard Jesus Campos in the leg after firing about 200 rifle rounds through the hotel room door. Then Paddock waited another 6 minutes for some reason before opening fire on the crowd. Once that rampage ended, it was another hour before police entered his room and found Paddock dead. That was the explanation as of a few hours ago. Didn't make sense, but they were going with it. Now there's a new account. In a statement just this afternoon, the company that owns the hotel where Paddock was staying says it has concluded that police are all wrong about what happened. Actually, the hotel says armed security officers rushed to Stephen Paddock's room, quote, immediately after the shooting first began. How did they respond when they got there? Why was Paddock able to continue shooting? We still don't know the answers to those questions. But that's just the beginning of what we don't know about this case. Media outlets, for example, confidently reported that Paddock made a living as a professional video poker player. Now, that's technically possible. We checked today with someone in Vegas, but it's a little like, as Ann Coulter pointed out in a column this morning, like claiming someone made a living smoking crack. Probably didn't happen. So what was really going on with Stephen Paddock? Still unknown. And so, by the way, is his motive still unknown. 64-year-old accountants don't typically spend months planning mass murder for no reason. There was a reason. No one can even guess as to what it was. Other questions that Coulter raised that news organizations ought to be asking but aren't. How can it possibly take 8 days to figure out when the alleged shooter checked into the hotel? Why was Paddock wearing gloves if he was about to commit suicide? Have any other solitary mass shooters ever had girlfriends? To those questions, we'd add this. How could someone possibly have burgled Paddock's home in Reno in the middle of one of the biggest criminal investigations in the history of the state? Why was no one guarding the house? Are investigators actually that incompetent? Maybe they are. Either way, institutional credibility is dying here. When the authorities get it this wrong, people stop believing them. So nobody should be surprised when conspiracy theories rush in to fill the void of credible information from officials. Joining us now is former Secret Service agent Dan Bongino. Dan, I wanted to talk to you because I know that you're a rigorously logical thinker. What could possibly account for the radical changes in something as simple as a timeline of the crime? As you just heard, they've changed again today.
Yeah, and I want to be very precise here, and I appreciate the compliment because this case is very troubling. Tucker, you and I can both agree, and everything you said is absolutely true. There are a lot of open questions. Here's what I think is going on. I think there is an information gap between the hotel and law enforcement, and I think incentives here are not the same. And I don't mean that to call out anyone. I'm not calling out. Everybody wants to get to the bottom of it. I get that. But obviously, there's legal liability on the hotel's end, and the timeline has to be absolutely precise. Now, the law enforcement idea, this is just to get down the sequence of events, not necessarily the timeline by seconds. Remember, if the difference between a 5-minute response time and a 7-minute response time for the sequence of events may not be as impactful, but for a legal lawsuit, it may make a big difference. So from a law enforcement perspective, Tucker, that's the only good guess. But I agree with you. This case makes almost no sense.
Well, and one of the main reasons that people want to move to America in the first place is the belief that our law enforcement is competent, our legal system is on the level. We have real justice in this country, unlike most of the rest of the world. And when authorities behave in a way that suggests they have no idea what they're doing, or they're not telling the whole truth, or behaving in kind of a third world way, it really kind of shakes your faith, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, and I think the problem here is with this 24-hour news cycle and social media, this is a different era. Listen, Tucker, let's be honest. 30 years ago, if Walter Cronkite or Tom Brokaw didn't mention it, it didn't happen. But now it's a different world. You have multiple news channels on 24 hours. People want to consume news. They're looking for a narrative and a story. And right now, this story makes no sense. I'll add another open question to you. They did some kind of a brain autopsy and found no significant evidence of any brain trauma, which every time you look for an explanation to this case, radicalization, brain trauma, a history of sociopathic behavior, the book slams shut on you. It just doesn't make sense. And that's why law enforcement has to be super careful about getting this right, because people are going to fill in the narrative themselves.
Right, and they haven't been super careful about getting it right. Clearly, by their own admission, they've changed the basic elements of the timeline. When was Jesus Campos shot? I mean, they changed that dramatically. So, are there other? Look, I never repeat conspiracy theories on TV. I think it's wrong, and I think it's irresponsible. But I'm starting to think maybe there's an entirely separate explanation, because the fact set that we have now does not, any way you kind of stack it, doesn't add up to something that I recognize as sensible.
Yeah. No, they don't. And the part that puzzles me the most is why the attacker killed himself with clearly the capacity. Believe me, I'm glad the attack ended when it did.
Yes.
But it's still, the question's not clear as to why he ended it, given this new revised timeline. And clearly, he was prepared for a more elongated, extended attack. Again, thankfully, it stopped. But it just doesn't make sense. And it makes you, it's an open question that makes you wonder. And reasonable people can ask reasonable questions about that. It's not unfair to ask that.
Last question, just process question. Who's running this investigation? Is it the feds primarily, or is it still Clark County?
Yeah, I would think that the local bureau office run out of Las Vegas probably has jurisdiction, but is seeking pretty significant input from the locals. But I just say that because in one of the press conferences, the Las Vegas sheriff clearly indicated that the FBI was the primary custodian of the evidence, which says to me that they're going to make it a federal jurisdiction case.
Yeah. Dan Bongino, thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me.
Well, Silicon Valley doesn't agree with Trump's policies. They've said so. Now they're going to war with his immigration plan. Up next, we'll talk to the head of a group backed by top tech leaders that is pushing for a path to citizenship for DACA recipients and more than 10 million other people living here illegally. Why are they doing that? Should we care? Stay tuned. Silicon Valley already trying to control what you see and think. They've got all your data. Google fires dissenting employees. Twitter censors anti-abortion tweets. Facebook alters its algorithms to eliminate what it calls fake news. Now Silicon Valley is targeting the administration's immigration agenda. The CEO of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, has a lobbying group along with a bunch of other companies. It's called Forward US, and it wants amnesty for 11 million people here illegally, more guest worker visas, other policies that would substantially increase our intake of foreign labor. Todd Schulte is the president of Forward.us, and he joins us tonight. Todd, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So it seems like the tech companies have, well, I guess maybe more power than any institutions in the history of the world, since they control virtually everything that we have. Shouldn't it make us a little uncomfortable if they're trying to control something as important as immigration legislation?
Yeah, well, I don't think anybody's looking to control stuff. And I think, what we're focused on today is, what to do about the DACA population, what to do about Dreamers. With the repeal of DACA, there's nearly 800,000 young people who came to this country at the average age of 6. Right. They've been here for 20 years, and so the question is, are we going to try to, as a nation, go and deport as many of these people as possible, which is absolutely the wrong approach, or are Republicans and Democrats going to come together and get legislation passed like the Bipartisan DREAM Act?
What if that look, I mean, let's be totally real. This is what it's always been, which is a push by business to get cheaper labor, to increase margins, to make the people who own the businesses even richer. So why are we pretending it's like a human rights quest when it's really just the age-old search for cheaper workers?
I don't think it's that. I think it's both the right thing to do for the country, but it's good for the economy and for workers too. I mean, I think the question here is if there's...
Good for which workers?
Good for everybody. I mean, the question is...
How is it good for everybody to import a lot more people willing to work for less? Why is that good for American workers?
Well, if we're talking about bringing in people who aren't here in the future, immigrants raise wages for people, but if we're talking about the dreamer population, the question is, do we think it's better for workers to allow people to earn citizenship, or do we think that, it's going to be better to put forth a plan to try to deport 800,000 people?
No, there are lots of actually intermediate steps, and one of them would be, I mean, if you're totally sincere, then I think you would agree that we should end chain migration. There's no reason that someone who comes here illegally is granted citizenship should be able to bring an average of 6 new relatives from a foreign country here, all of whom get citizenship too. Why would we be for that?
Well, Tucker, I think it's important to understand the question here is, there are 780,000 people, and they're at risk of deportation. So there's a lot of things we need to fix about our immigration system. You and I may not agree. I do think that we should have a pathway to citizenship for the 11 million.
That's the dishonest part. So when you say it's under 800,000, you're not including their relatives who would be eligible to come here if they became citizens. So you're actually dramatically underselling the reality of this program. It would mean millions of new people.
Well, I'm not. I think it was pretty straightforward, that, Tucker. I think that there's a lot of things wrong with our immigration system. The question is, for these people now, what are we going to do? Now, in 10 or 15 years, do I think we should have second-class citizens? I don't. But I hope that 10 or 15 years from now, we fixed a lot of aspects of our immigration system, whether that's doing a better job, having a legal immigration system that makes sense for today's economy, whether it's border security. But the question is Congress actually going to get together, like the president said?
I wonder, I mean, people are always selling me the kind of ice cream policy. It's awesome for everybody. But if you import millions and millions and millions and millions of low-wage workers, low-skill, low-education workers, as we have in the past 50 years, is no one hurt by that? Is there no American worker who sees his wages remain stagnant or even decline because of that? Or is supply and demand not in effect here?
It's a great point. The National Academy of Sciences.
Actually, is no one hurt?
Well, the National Academy of Sciences has been pretty clear. 91% of Americans actually see their raises increased by immigration here. Now, that means, look,
wait a second. 91% of Americans haven't seen their wages increase
because of immigration. Other things have happened.
Well, so that actually hasn't. Wait, hold on.
That hasn't happened in 30 years.
So how? I mean, that as a factual matter, huge swaths of the middle class have seen their wages remain stagnant or decline. I'm not blaming immigration, but you can't say that we know that low-wage immigration raises wages when wages haven't risen.
Well, it's actually what the economists would say, and I'm glad to hear you're not blaming immigration for that, because that's backed up by the economic data.
But you haven't answered my question, which is nobody hurt?
Oh, I mean, I think
who's hurt by this? Because there's always a downside to everything, but everyone lies about it in D.C. Oh, it's all good.
So, no, this is a good question.
People.
Who do you think would be hurt by not deporting 800,000 people?
I think it is.
I mean, deporting 800,000 people.
I think it is ruined. Look, liberals used to care about wages. Wages matter. How much you make at the end of the week? Can you send your kids to summer camp? Are you worried about your medical care? Right, okay. Now I see liberals working on behalf of big business to make certain big businesses are more profitable at the expense of workers' wages. And I'm thinking, whatever happened to all the liberals who used to care about wages? Where did they go? Do you know where they are?
I mean, again, I think it's really important to keep in mind, there's a lot of things that happen with our economy. The question is, what's the impact of immigration? Putting aside the dreamer question for a second here, 9 in 10 Americans have seen, there's lots of things going on, immigration have a positive impact on their paycheck.
I'm just saying, as someone who deals with this every day, that's factually untrue because 9 in 10 Americans haven't seen their wages rise. Right. So that's just like, that's not a real stat.
Obviously, immigration's not the only factor in our economy.
I'm not saying that it is.
But I think when we come back to it, though, the question is there's 700,000 and I'm going to ask this,
people,
look,
if you were selling
is that good for the economy?
A health care bill, if you were selling gun control, if you're selling something I agreed with, I'd still ask you the same question because nobody ever tells the truth in D.C. What's the downside? If you let 5 million new people come here, who gets hurt? Or does every single person in America benefit?
No, of course not.
Who gets hurt?
Who gets hurt?
Yeah, who sees the downside for this?
Well, I think the question is, who's going to be hurt by passing a DREAM Act?
You're never going to answer.
No. I mean, you can say that, but the question is like...
Well, then answer. We got 10 seconds. Anyone get hurt at all?
But I don't understand the question here. The question is, are you going to deport 800,000 people? And the answer is, that would hurt a lot of people, Tucker.
You're a tough man to debate, Todd Schulte. Thank you for coming on. Appreciate it. We'll be right back. Like sands through an hourglass, another hour is done. But if you liked tonight, and we hope you did, tomorrow, unbelievable. Our investigation continues into NBC News killing that investigation of Harvey Weinstein. How and why did NBC do that? Ronan Farrow had a bombshell. He worked for them. We've got a reporter who has a behind-the-scenes account of what actually happened and who's responsible, so don't miss it. Until then, every night, 8 p.m., the show that is the sworn enemy of lying, pomposity, smugness, and groupthink. DVR it if you haven't. And above all, stay tuned for Sean Hannity in New York. Good night.
All right, thanks, Tucker, as always.